this is the other part of chapter 12 where I'm going to go over the chapter a little bit. Social psychology, which looks at how people impact one another. What's called the power of the situation. We all may find ourselves acting differently in certain situations based on what everyone around us is doing. So it takes a look at that. It takes a look at prejudice and discrimination. And let's just jump in and go through the chapter. Power of the situation. Social psychologists are interested in all aspects of personality and social interaction, looking at the influence of interpersonal and group relationships on human behavior. We look at how the presence of other individuals in groups impacts our own thoughts and behaviors. People will change their behavior to align with the social situation at hand. And if we're in a new situation, typically we're going to take our cues from those around us. So the field of social psychology studies topics at what's called the both intra and interpersonal level. Intrapersonal just means it pertains to the individual, including emotions and attitudes, self and social cognition. And then interpersonal just has to do with others in group. And this would include helping behavior, aggression, prejudice and discrimination, attraction and close relationships, and group processes and intergroup relationships. So, behavior is both a product of the situation, which will include cultural influences, social roles, and the presence of bystanders, and it's a product of the person, like the person's own personality. Subfields of psychology tend to focus on one influence or behavior over others. Situationism is a term that means our behavior and actions are determined by our immediate environment. Dispositionism holds that our behavior is determined by internal factors, such as personality traits or temperament. And there is a term called fundamental attribution error. We tend to think that people are in control of their own behaviors, and so any behavior that changes is due to something internal, for example, habits, personalities, or temperament. According to some social psychologists, people overemphasize these internal factors and don't see what's really going on. They tend to assume that the behavior is a trait, and they underestimate the power of what's going on around them. Failing to recognize when the behavior is due to situational variables is called the fundamental attribution error. A really basic example of this is that if we saw someone stealing, we might make some judgments about their character, when in reality, perhaps they're stealing food to feed their family who has none. It's one example. It's so powerful that people may often overlook obvious situational behavior. And this chapter gives you a really good example of that. Something called the halo effect refers to the tendency to let your overall impression of a person kind of shadow how you feel about their character. For instance, we might assume that people who are physically attractive are more likely to be good people than those who are less attractive. I'm not skipping this because it's not important, but you can read about it. Another type of bias is called the actor-observer bias, and it's when you attribute other people's behavior to something going on with them, that attribution error we just discussed, but you attribute, or we could even say blame, our own behavior on situational forces. As actors of behavior, we have more information available to explain our own behavior. However, as observers, we have less information. So if you heard of a classmate doing poorly on a test, you might make a judgment about that and think, well, they just didn't study. Whereas if you did poorly on a test, maybe you might say, well, that wasn't covered in class, or the way the questions were written wasn't clear. So it's the difference between looking internally or externally for the cause of behavior. Self-serving bias. We can understand this by digging more deeply into attribution. Attribution means what do we attribute something to. You could sort of use the word blame, but that puts it in a negative light. But it's really a belief about the cause of a result. One model of attribution proposes three main dimensions, something called locus of control, which is internal versus external, stability, and controllability. In this context, the word stability refers to the extent in which the circumstances that result in a given outcome are changeable. Circumstances are considered stable if they're not likely to change. Controllability means, can you control the outcome? And then self-serving bias is the tendency to explain our successes due to dispositional characteristics, but our failures due to situational. And this is culture dependent, and it serves to protect our self-esteem. It's almost like one of those defense mechanisms we discussed. So if you do good on a test, for example, you earned it, you did it, you worked hard. But if you did bad, it's because the test was poorly written, for example. And here are some more examples. This worldview is called the just world hypothesis, and it is the belief that people get what they deserve. In order to maintain that the world is a fair place, people tend to think that good people experience positive outcomes and bad people experience negative outcomes. The ability to think of the world as a fair place, where people get what they deserve. Sorry, you may hear my dog barking in the background. Allows us to feel that the world is predictable and that we have some control over life events. For example, the idea is if you want to experience positive outcomes, you just need to work hard to get ahead. But we know it's a lot more complicated than that, right? Social roles and how they influence behavior. A social role is a pattern of behavior that's expected of a person in a certain setting or group. Each of us has several. You may be at the same time a student, a parent, an aspiring teacher, a son, a daughter, a sister, a brother, a spouse. How do these roles influence your behavior? And they're defined by culturally shared knowledge. That is, everyone in a given culture knows what's expected in certain roles, right? Social role for a student, you have certain ideas about what that would look like. Social norm is a group's expectation of what is appropriate and acceptable for its members. How are they supposed to behave and think? A script, which we've kind of talked about before, is a person's knowledge about the sequence of events expected in a specific setting. And here we get into the description of the Stanford Prison Experiment, which is one of your discussion questions. The famous Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted by social psychologist Philip Zimbardo, was done at Stanford University in 1971. And they wanted to demonstrate the power of social roles, norms, and scripts. They placed an ad in a California newspaper asking for male volunteers to participate in a study about the psychological effects of prison life. More than 70 volunteered, and then they underwent psychological testing to eliminate anybody who had any psychiatric issues, medical issues, or a history of crime or drug abuse. Whittled it down to $24. Each was paid $15 a day, which today would be like $80. And here's a key. They were randomly assigned whether or not they were going to play the role of a prisoner or a guard. They didn't get to choose. And you know, based on research methods, that it was important that they were randomly assigned so that they didn't bring bias into. This goes on to describe it, so I want you to read this, and then you're going to watch the video. This isn't the video. This is a interview that is really good with Philip, but you have to watch the video that's in your discussion. So, attitude. Social psychologists have documented how the power of situation can influence our behaviors. Now we turn to the power of the situation on our attitudes and beliefs. An attitude is our evaluation of a person or an idea or an object. We have attitudes about many things, ranging from products we might pick up, certainly to people around the world, to political policies. Typically, attitudes are favorable or unfavorable, positive or negative, and they all have three components: an affective component, which are your feelings, a behavioral component, which is the effect of the attitude on behavior, and a cognitive component, which is belief and knowledge, your thoughts, right? Our attitudes and beliefs are not only influenced by external forces, but by internal forces that we have some control over. Like our behavior, our attitudes and thoughts are not always changed by situational pressures, but they can be changed by our own free will. And in this section coming up, we discuss the conditions under we would want to change our attitudes and beliefs. So there is a term called cognitive dissonance, and it's when we're psychologically uncomfortable because we have two inconsistent or competing attitudes, behaviors, or cognitions. Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance states that when we experience a conflict in our behaviors, attitudes, or beliefs that runs counter to our positive self-perceptions, feeling good about ourselves, we've experienced psychological dissonance. Example is if you believe smoking is bad for your health, but you continue to smoke. Research documented that conflicting cognitions that threaten individuals' positive self-image are the ones that cause this dissonance. When we experience cognitive dissonance, that psychological discomfort, we're motivated to decrease it because it's psychologically, physically, and mentally uncomfortable. We can reduce this by bringing our cognitions, our thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors in line, making them harmonious. And this can be done in a few different ways. We can change the behavior that's making us uncomfortable, can change our thoughts about it, and that might involve rationalization or actually denying, or we can add a new thought altogether, something to kind of justify it. But we do all kinds of things to reduce that discomfort. The effect of initiation. A social psychology concept called justification of effort suggests that we value goals and achievements that we put a lot of effort into. According to this theory, if something is difficult for us to achieve, we believe it is more worthwhile. This may have to do with initiation into a group, a hard assignment. It plays out in many different areas. Persuasion is the process of changing our attitude towards something based on some kind of communication. Much of the persuasion we experience absolutely comes from outside forces. There is a model called the Yale Attitude Change Approach, which describes the conditions under which people tend to change their attitudes. And it says that certain features of the persuasive message, the content of the message, and the characteristics of the audience will influence the persuasiveness of the message. Certainly, we would want the source of the message to be credible, the features of the message itself, and features of the audience. Something called the elaboration likelihood model considers the variables and attitude of the attitude change approach, meaning that source, contents of the message, and the characteristics, all used to determine when attitude change would occur. And according to this elaboration likelihood model, there are two main routes that play a role in delivering a persuasive message. One is called central and one is called peripheral. The central one, the audience is very motivated, they're analytical, high effort, they're interested in the message, they value it, and they have lasting change in the attitude. The peripheral might be when the audience is not all that motivated, not much effort, and any change is usually just temporary. Central route is logic driven and uses data and facts to convince people. The direct route focuses on the quality of the information. Central route to persuasion works best when the target of the persuasion is analytical and willing to engage. And that peripheral route is an indirect route that uses cues to associate positivity. Foot in the door technique. This is often used in sales. And it's when the persuader gets a person to agree to bestow a small favor or buy a small item, only later to then ask for something really bigger. Conformity, and this gets into the experiments that you're going to view. But conformity, Asch effect, is when Solomon Asch did experiments in the 50s to determine how people are affected by the thoughts and behaviors of others. And I'm going to let you explore this on your own. But know that within this type of research, there are participants where there's a subject, and then in this one, there's something called a confederate, or the actual researcher. And it's a person basically who's in on it and works for the researcher. They're used to manipulate social situations as part of the research design, and true naive participants think that they are just participants like them. And again, I'm going to let you read specifically about that experiment. Conformity is the change in a person's behavior to go along with the group, even if he doesn't agree with the group. And the term, the Asch effect, is the influence on the group majority on an individual's judgment. So some of the things that might make people change their view: the size of the majority. If there's a huge group that believe and act one way, then an individual is more likely to conform. Something else that might impact it is the presence of another dissenter. If somebody else speaks up and says, that is not right, or I don't agree, then people are less likely to conform. And the public or private nature of responses. When responses are made in front of others, it's more likely everybody's going to conform. But when they're private, like voting in secret, then you have more of a chance of people saying what their true beliefs are. And obedience. So this gets into that Stanley Milgram experiment, which is available to you under the supplemental media. Obedience is the change of an individual's behavior to comply with the demand of an authority figure. So that's key there. It involves an authority figure. People comply because they're afraid of the consequences if they don't. And you can read about the Milgram experiment. People thought they were delivering electric shock to the other members because this person they perceived to be in authority told them to do it. Groupthink. Modification of the opinions of members of a group to align with what they think is the group consensus. In group situations, the group takes actions that individuals on their own would likely not perform, but groups make more extreme decisions than individuals do. It can hinder opposing trains of thought, and this elimination of diverse opinions contributes to what's called faulty decisions by the group. And I'm sure you can think of political examples where this occurs. So, these are some of the symptoms of groupthink. Perceiving the group as invulnerable or invincible, feeling like the group cannot possibly be wrong or do wrong. Believing that the group is morally correct. Self-censorship by group members, such as withholding information so that nothing is disrupted. Quashing, which means just squelching down, eliminating dissenting opinions. Shielding the group leader from any view that doesn't go along with his or her view. Perceiving an illusion that everybody is unanimous, everybody agrees. Holding stereotypes or negative attitudes towards the group, the outgroup, or others with differing viewpoints. How can this be avoided, given all these things that contribute to it? Several strategies that could improve group decision-making would be seeking outside opinions, voting in private, having a leader not share his or her position until everybody's had a chance to say their thoughts, conducting research on all viewpoints, and weighing the costs and benefits of the options and developing contingency plans. Group polarization, strengthening of an original group attitude after the discussion of views within a group. So if a group initially favors something and then it's discussed, the consensus is going to be even stronger. Social traps refer to situations that arise when individuals or groups of individuals behave in ways that aren't in their best interest. However, once it's established, it's hard to get out. Social loafing involves a reduction of individual output on tasks where contributions are pooled. Because each individual's efforts are not evaluated, individuals might be less motivated to perform. The clearest example of this is if you are assigned a group project and everybody gets graded the same based on the outcome. De-individuation. This refers to situations where a person might feel a sense of anonymity and a reduction in accountability and sense. It's pointed to in cases in which mob or riot-like behaviors occur, but research on the subject has yielded some inconsistent results. But here's a chart of what I just quickly went over, and these are types of social influence. Understanding prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice is an attitude. That's key to understanding the differences. It's a negative attitude and feeling toward an individual based solely on their membership in a group. It's common against people who are members of an unfamiliar cultural group. So certain types of education, contact, interactions, and building relationships with members of different cultural groups might reduce the tendency towards prejudice. Prejudice often begins in the form of a stereotype, and that's just when you hold a specific belief or assumption about individuals based on their membership in a group, regardless of their individual characteristics. They get overgeneralized and applied to all members of a group. Discrimination is when there's actually action. So prejudice is an attitude, but discrimination is when there's actual action towards an individual because they belong in a group. So people being treated poorly, such as excluding older adults from their circle of friends. In this way, discrimination is a form of oppression. And this chart gives you some examples. Racism is prejudice and discrimination against an individual based on their membership in a racial group. So it's holding the thoughts and taking negative actions. And you'll see that in your Dropbox assignment that is a class-divided experiment. Sexism is prejudice and discrimination based on their sex. Ageism, same thing, based on their age. Another form of prejudice is homophobia, which is an umbrella term referring to prejudice and discrimination of individuals based solely on their sexual orientation, and it could be applied to bisexual, lesbian, gay, and other non-heterosexual people. Transphobia is the hatred or fear of those who are perceived to break or blur stereotypical gender roles. And these things exist due to social learning and conformity of social norms. So remember, in the questions for your class divided assignment, there's something about self-fulfilling prophecy. It is an expectation held by a person that alters their behavior in a way that tends to make it true. So I'll give you a really specific hint when I ask you to identify something in the class divided video. When the children are in the group that is being discriminated against, they are told they're not as smart as the other students, and their test scores are lower. When they are in the group and they are told, the group that is told they are smarter, their test scores go up. This is a really good example. I'm not going to do it in the video, but and yours won't be highlighted because I'm reading from my book, but it's worth reading. Stereotypes, Self-Fulfilling Prophecy. This example of an employer interviewing a gay job applicant is important to read. Confirmation bias. We've talked about this throughout the course. We seek out information that supports our stereotypes and our belief, and we just magically don't see anything that's inconsistent with that. Aggression. Humans engage in aggression when they seek to cause harm or pain. It takes two forms, depending on the motive: hostile or instrumental. Hostile aggression is motivated by feelings or anger, and the intent is to actually cause pain. Instrumental aggression is motivated by achieving a goal, and the initial intent isn't necessarily to cause pain. Bullying, repeated negative treatment of another person, often an adolescent, but it could be any age, over time. A one-time incident in which, for example, one child hits another on the playground would not be considered bullying. It's repeated behavior that is bullying. Bullying involves three parties: the bully, the victim, and witnesses or bystanders. The act of bullying involves an imbalance of power, with the bully holding more power, either physically, emotionally, or socially over the victim. This tells you some risk factors. Cyberbullying, you've totally heard of, has to do with using technology. Can take many forms, can be harassing, spreading rumors, creating a website, threatening, teasing. The bystander effect, which your second discussion question is about. It is a phenomenon in which a witness or a bystander does not help a victim or a person in distress. They just watch what is happening. Social psychologists hold that we make these decisions based on the social situation, not our own personality variables. And this is going to tell you where this came from, about a horrible story where a woman was being murdered and everybody thought someone else was going to take care of it, which is called diffusion of responsibility. Nobody helps because they think somebody else in the group will help. Pro-social behavior. It's just behavior with the intent to help people. And altruism, people's desire to help, even if the costs to them outweigh the benefits of helping. And you can read about that. Empathy is the capacity to understand another person's perspective, to feel what they feel. An empathetic person makes an emotional connection with others and feels compelled to help. Forming relationships. This word is pronounced homophily, and it's the tendency for us to form social networks, including friendships, marriage, business relationships, and many other types of relationships with others who are similar to us. And in doing that, it limits our exposure to diversity. Reciprocity is the give and take in relationships. We contribute to relationships, but we expect to receive benefits as well. And self-disclosure is simply sharing personal information. This section talks about attraction. Sternberg's theory of triangular love. I'm going to let you read it so as not to take up too much time on your video. Social exchange theory. We act as naive economists and we keep track of costs and benefits of forming and maintaining a relationship with others. And I will let you read about that. And I think that's it. Okay, so it's a long chapter. And you do have a lot of work. And like I said, if you think you're going to need a 2-day extension on the class divided Dropbox assignment, send me an email before it's due. Send it through the classroom. And just as a reminder how to do that, because I certainly have not heard from everyone, you would go to your communication tab, class list, find my name, click on it, and it populates my email address, and put extension request and then send me a little blurb. I'm only allowing this for 2 days, this chapter only, and it's only on the class divided Dropbox assignment. If you go that route to do it, please make sure you still do it. It's a really important assignment, and it's actually an assignment that's used every class you have. Your instructor has selected one assignment to kind of be a measure of some overall school goals. So after I grade all them, I go and do another thing, and the school looks at how everyone did on it, not individually in a judgmental way, but just so if you don't participate in it, it makes the numbers kind of not meaningful. So, and it's a really valuable assignment, and most students enjoy it. I know you're getting busy this time of year, but just push yourself to do it, okay? And it's easy to do, so make sure you read all of the question and completely answer it so that you can get all your credit. As always, if you have questions, send me an email. If you need to set up a Zoom, I'm happy to do that with you. And that's it for Chapter 12.